The hospital room was silent except for the hum of monitors and the distant beep of an IV pump. Kenneth Reeves, 69, stared at the ceiling, his chest wrapped in fresh bandages, the raw aftermath of a quadruple bypass. The screen displayed a message from Brandon. "Hospital's expensive. Just Uber when they release you. I have showings."
So this is it. After all the years, not even a ride home.
He thumbed the call button. The line trilled once, then voicemail. He didn't leave a message. His hand fell to the thin blanket, the phone sliding from his grip as the weight of the words settled in. A knock. Then the nurse entered, a clipboard in hand, oblivious. She announced it was time to go, her tone too bright for the room. Kenneth dressed slowly in his gray hoodie and navy jacket, the plastic bag waiting on the nightstand. He sank into the wheelchair, clutching the bag as the nurse stepped behind him. The nurse pushed the wheelchair through the long corridor, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, past empty waiting areas. The automatic doors slid open. He stood, and the nurse let go as a rush of cold morning air struck his face. He stepped forward alone, the plastic bag swinging from his hand, his footsteps unsteady on the pavement.
My own son, my only child, and he couldn't spare 10 minutes.
He slowed at the discharge curb, a barren strip of asphalt under gray sky. Not a single vehicle waited. His breath clouded as he pulled out his phone. The Uber app glowed on the screen. The screen flashed. "No drivers available. Try again later."
Of course, no son, no cab, no luck.
He dialed Brandon's number one more time. It rang, then the automated voice told him to leave a message. He didn't. He just stood there, the cold wind cutting through his thin jacket, utterly alone at the curb. The rumble of a heavy engine broke the silence. Kenneth looked up to see a black Lincoln Navigator pulling into the curb. The driver shut off the motor and stepped out, a tall, silver-haired man in a perfectly tailored gray suit. He stood for a moment, staring at Kenneth with an expression of pure, disbelieving shock.
Kenneth Reeves? I never thought I'd see you again, not after all this time."
Ken, no one has called me that in 40 years. Who is this man?
Kenneth's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He just shook his head, unable to place the face.
"It's Eric Mason. We served together. In '71, you remember."
The words struck like a thunderclap. Kenneth's eyes flickered, searching the stranger's face. Slowly, the hard lines around his mouth softened. Recognition dawned, pulling him back across decades. Eric extended his hand, open and waiting, the years between them collapsing into that single gesture. Kenneth stared at his own trembling hand, then slowly released the plastic bag and grasped Eric's waiting palm.
"I've been searching for you for 8 years, Ken. Nearly gave up. I set up a Veterans Network alert years ago. Your surgery pinged the system. I couldn't believe it."
Why? Why look for me after all this time?
"Because we made a promise, Ken, and I keep my promises."
Kenneth stared at Eric's profile, searching for the boy he remembered. He only saw an old man with a soldier's posture. The Navigator pulled smoothly away from the curb, the hospital receding in the rear window. Kenneth watched until the building was a blur, his hands folded over the plastic bag in his lap.
"You're probably wondering where we're going. Trust me, Ken, you need to see something."
He might as well be a ghost from a life I buried, but I have nowhere else to go.
"Ken, there's something you need to know. You've been listed as missing in action since 1981.
Kenneth turned sharply, the words not making sense. His mouth opened, but nothing came.
"Clerical error. 2 databases have you as presumed dead. For 40 years, you've been a ghost."
Dead? I've been here the whole time, working, paying taxes. How could they think that?
Eric's hands tightened on the steering wheel. The road ahead seemed to blur as the truth settled in.
40 years erased by a typo. My own country forgot I existed.
After the pullout, records were chaos. A lot of men got lost in the system. I'm sorry, Ken.
A fragment surfaced in Kenneth's mind, thick jungle, the weight of a rifle, a promise made in mud.
I've spent 8 years trying to fix it. That's why I found you.
Kenneth stared out the window, his reflection a specter. The signs for Shaker Heights passed unnoticed. The navigator cruised past iron gates and stopped before a sprawling gray stone mansion.
This is where he lives? The boy from the jungle in a palace while I barely scraped by?
Eric opened Kenneth's door and took his arm, guiding him up the broad stone steps. They entered a foyer of dark wood and marble, a chandelier glittering above. Eric led him to a quiet room where an entire wall was covered in framed photographs. Kenneth's eyes found one, two young soldiers, arms around each other, faces he knew like his own heartbeat.
I built this wall for every man we lost. I thought you were one of them.
All these years he thought I was dead, and he kept my picture up.
Kenneth's hand pressed against his mouth, tears welling. The plastic bag slipped from his fingers. For the first time since the surgery, Kenneth felt not alone, but seen by a ghost who had never stopped searching. Eric guided Kenneth into a wood-paneled study, gesturing toward a leather chair before opening a small safe. He withdrew a thick folder, its cover stamped with a faded government seal, and laid it on the desk.
This is the reason I never stopped looking. A memorial fund. In your name.
Memorial Fund for Kenneth Reeves, presumed Kia. They set up a fund for a dead man.
It's grown to just under $1.4 million, Ken.
1.4 million. That's more than I've seen in any bank in any life I ever lived.
It's yours, but there's a catch. You have to correct your MIA status. That triggers a public announcement.
Kenneth's hand froze above the paper. The weight of exposure pressed harder than the surgery.
Your name, your story, on every news outlet. There's no quiet way to come back from the dead.
The silence between them filled with the rustle of official documents, a fortune and a secret locked on the same page. Morning light flooded the sunroom. Kenneth sat at the breakfast table, a cup of coffee cooling, untouched. His phone buzzed against the polished wood. The caller ID glowed. Brandon Reeves. He stared at it for 3 long rings.
Dad, it's me. Do you need anything? I could drop off some food later if you want.
I'm being taken care of by family.
What's that supposed to mean? Who's with you? Dad?
Kenneth pressed the end call button. The connection severed with a soft click.
Blood doesn't define family. Sometimes it's the soldier who never stopped searching.
He placed the phone face down and lifted his coffee. The ceramic mug radiated a warmth he hadn't felt in days. In his car, Brandon gripped the steering wheel with white knuckles. His breathing was shallow, his face flushed. He stared at the dead line, then threw the phone onto the passenger seat. The plastic clatter was his only answer. Eric found Kenneth in the sunroom and asked him to follow. They walked to a dark-paneled library lined with medals.
Sit down, Ken. There's more you need to understand about that money.
He set a worn leather case on the desk and opened it, revealing a bundle of yellowed envelopes tied with twine.
I leave what I have to the memory of those still missing, so that one day they might be found.
These aren't donations, they're prayers from boys who never grew old.
Every dollar in that fund was given by a brother who believed in the promise we made. The promise to never leave a man behind.
Kenneth took a letter, his fingers tracing the ink of a name he hadn't spoken in decades.
Johnny. Martinez? Reynolds.
This money isn't a gift. It's their promise, kept. If you take it, you carry them with you.
Kenneth looked up at the photo wall, then back at the letters. The weight was unbearable and sacred. Dawn crept across the sunroom floor. Kenneth hadn't slept, the letters and the wall living behind his eyes.
I'll do it. I'll correct my Mia status. It's the only way to truly honor them, and to come home.
Eric's attorney arrived within the hour, his briefcase snapping open as he laid the correction forms on the polished table.
Every name, every fallen brother was stitched into the language of these legal pages.
He lifted the fountain pen from its stand. His fingers trembled for a beat, then he pressed ink to paper. Eric's hand rested on his shoulder, grounding him in the present.
40 years of silence, broken by the simple stroke of a pen.
The attorney gathered the signed documents, nodded once and withdrew, leaving the 2 men in stillness.
I've been a ghost for 4 decades, but now the world will learn that a dead man still breathes.
There was no turning back. He only prayed the men on that wall would be proud. Brandon thumbed the hospital's number. His voice clipped as he demanded to know who took charge of his father's release. The receptionist hesitated, then told him a Mr. Mason had signed the release as next of kin.
Next of kin? I'm his only son. This is fraud.
He scoured veterans' forums on his laptop. A photograph surfaced, the black navigator at a Shaker Heights estate. He drove there, pulling up to the iron gate as a uniformed guard emerged from the gatehouse. The guard shook his head. "Private property. Mr. Mason is not expecting you." Brandon slammed the steering wheel.
He's my father. You're keeping him from me. I'll report you for elder abuse.
Eric's phone rang. His lawyer's voice was grim. A complaint had been filed for elder abuse and illegal confinement.
It's Brandon, isn't it? He's trying to stop the correction.
Let him try. The truth is on our side, and so is the law.
The attorney laid out the reality over speakerphone. The complaint, though baseless, could stall the correction process by weeks.
Weeks? While a spurious complaint ties our hands?
Weeks. Brandon could twist every fact, turn my resurrection into a scandal.
We can counter this. I'll push for an immediate press release, short-circuit the bureaucracy.
Then do it. I'm done hiding. If the world needs to see me, let them see.
Eric picked up the receiver and began dialing, his voice crisp as he activated a network built over decades. Kenneth watched the man who had never stopped searching now fight for him in a different kind of battle. A fax line whirred. A press contact was secured. The machinery of truth creaked into motion.
It's in motion. By tomorrow, every television station will have your updated file.
Kenneth straightened his back, the weight shifting from shame to purpose. He was no longer a victim. He was a soldier reclaiming his name. A single call cut through the afternoon. The attorney's voice was flat. The elder abuse complaint had been dismissed as frivolous.
Dismissed. Now we move forward. No more delays.
He pressed a button on his phone, connecting to the PR firm, and gave the final green light. The machinery of revelation engaged. In the sunroom, a single sheet lay on the breakfast table. The official press release, still warm from the printer.
Every word on this page is another brick out of the tomb I've been locked in.
He traced the headline with a fingertip, then read it aloud in a voice barely above a whisper.
Vietnam veteran Kenneth Reeves officially found alive after 4 decades.
In 5 minutes. That headline goes to every network. There's no turning back now, Ken.
Kenneth set the paper down with hands that no longer trembled. He met Eric's gaze and gave a single, certain nod. They sat in silence, the soldier and the brother in arms as the clock on the mantelpiece pushed toward the hour of his resurrection. The library screen flickered to life, the 6 o'clock news theme filling the room. A polished anchor appeared beside a photo of a young soldier, Kenneth, decades gone. In a stunning correction, a Vietnam veteran listed as Mia since 1981 has been found alive. Kenneth's hospital photo flashed on screen, the gray hoodie, the weary expression. Eric raised the volume. The anchor's voice filled the space, detailing the clerical error and the memorial fund. Kenneth watched, his thoughts a torrent. 40 years of being nobody, and now the world was learning his name. The broadcast closed with a line, reached for comment. His son Brandon Reeves declined to speak. Kenneth's hand found Eric's. They did not speak. The gesture said everything. The television cut to commercial, but neither man moved. The weight of resurrection held them still. On the wall behind them, the brass plaque gleamed. Kenneth Reeves was no longer missing. Brandon's phone lit up with a news alert. The headline stopped him cold. Vietnam veteran found alive after 40 years. He scrolled furiously, his face twisting with every line that failed to mention his name. Without hesitating, he jabbed the call button. The line rang on the other end. In the sunroom, Kenneth watched the phone vibrate. He picked it up, his expression unreadable.
You're making me look like a monster. You have to tell them I'm your son, that I was there.
You told me to take an Uber. Eric came. That's the story they'll print. Nothing else matters.
I made a mistake. You can't just erase me from your life.
You erased yourself, Brandon, the minute you chose a showing over your father.
There was a long, hollow silence on the other end. Then the call disconnected with a soft, defeated beep. Kenneth set the phone down on the sunroom table, his hand steady. The cord was cut. 3 days later, a foundation memo surfaced online. It listed beneficiaries of the memorial fund. Near the bottom, one line was struck through in black ink. Brandon Reeves. Brandon stared at the screen, his coffee untouched. The public comments below the post were merciless.
They're calling me the Uber son. That's my legacy now.
He scrolled through hundreds of replies, each one a verdict he couldn't appeal. At the estate, Kenneth sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the garden. He had not read the article.
I didn't do this to hurt him. I did it because I finally mattered to someone.
The foundation released a final statement. No benefits shall ever be provided to Brandon Reeves. The document was unappealable. The ink had dried on Kenneth's new life. On the porch, Eric joined Kenneth, saying nothing, just sitting, 2 old soldiers, watching the light fade. The next morning, Eric led Kenneth through the silent house to the library, where several gray-haired veterans stood waiting. On the desk lay a ceremonial check with Kenneth's name and the full amount printed beneath the foundation's seal. Kenneth did not speak. He simply nodded, his eyes holding each man in turn. He took the fresh photograph of himself, framed in simple wood, and walked to the wall of faces. He hung it beside the fading image of his younger self, the 2 faces a lifetime apart. Eric's hand came to rest on his shoulder, the weight of a brother who had never stopped carrying him.
I'm no longer a ghost. I'm one of them again.
The brass plaque below the photographs reflected the morning light. It no longer bore the word missing.
Welcome home, Ken.
Kenneth placed his palm flat against the glass, and for the first time in 40 years, he felt the warmth of his own name. 6 months slipped by. The fund was managed, and Kenneth had found a quiet rhythm at the estate. One morning, a crisp envelope with a familiar return address sat on the breakfast table. He unfolded the paper. The handwriting was unsteady, as if shaped by a man unused to pen and ink. "Dad, I'm sorry. I know I can't undo what I did. Can we talk, please?"
I'm sorry. That's it? After leaving me on the curb like a stranger.
He didn't cry. He didn't crumple the page. He folded it carefully, as if it were any other piece of mail. He rose and crossed to the writing desk. The drawer opened with a soft scrape. The letter joined a pile of old bills and receipts. He closed the drawer and returned to his chair.
Some wounds don't heal. Some bridges once burned stay ash.
Outside the window, the garden bloomed in full color. Kenneth turned a page of his novel. He did not look up again. Kneeling in the garden soil, Kenneth pressed a seedling into the earth, his fingers dark with humus. He straightened, wiped his brow, and watched a bee drift between the blossoms. By midweek, he sat at a long table in a community hall, surrounded by gray-haired veterans. He spoke of the promise that held them all together, and every face around the table nodded in silence. That evening, Eric leaned back in his chair at the sunroom table, a half-empty plate between them. He recalled a story from '73, and for the first time, Kenneth laughed, a deep, full sound that surprised even him. Later, alone in the sunroom, Kenneth touched the spine of his worn library book and let the quiet settle around him. In the library, Eric stood by the display case, adjusting a newly polished metal. A week later, a photographer from a veterans magazine came to capture a group portrait. Kenneth stood in the back row, smiling. As the camera flashed, he felt a hand on his shoulder. Without looking, he knew it was Eric. The sky deepened into orange and rose as Kenneth settled into the rocking chair beside Eric on the wide porch. Eric poured 2 glasses from the pitcher, the lemonade catching the low sun as he handed one across. They sat without speaking, the creak of the rocking chairs blending with the distant chorus of evening birds.
Welcome home, brother.
Kenneth turned his head, meeting Eric's eyes. A lifetime of unspoken words passed between them in the stillness. He gave a single, certain nod, then faced the horizon again. No words were needed. The sun dipped below the tree line, spilling its last gold across the garden where Kenneth had planted that morning. Kenneth's hand rested on the arm of the rocking chair, his fingers relaxed, the glass of lemonade untouched beside him. The world grew quiet, and in that silence he was not a patient, not a ghost, not a forgotten soldier, he was simply home. The screen faded to black, holding only the afterimage of a man who finally, after decades, belonged. The morning light fell softly across the library floor, dust motes drifting in the stillness. Kenneth stood before the wall of faces, his hands clasped loosely behind his back. The new photograph of himself hung there, no longer an addition but a permanent part of the story.
He was no longer the man on the curb. He was a soldier who had come home.
The estate had ceased to be a refuge. It was simply where he belonged. Eric's footsteps approached, and he stopped beside Kenneth without a word. They stood shoulder to shoulder, the two of them and the photographs, a century of service etched in silver and paper. Outside the window, the garden stretched in neat rows, the season's last blooms nodding in the breeze. Kenneth touched the brass plaque one final time, his fingerprint fading on the cool metal. And the screen dissolved slowly, leaving only the quiet truth of a life reclaimed. The sun rose on another morning, and the estate stirred gently. Coffee brewing, the murmur of voices in the hall. Kenneth sat at the sunroom table, a letter in hand from a fellow veteran, his reading glasses low on his nose.
He sends his regards. Another one who thought I was dead.
There was no bitterness in the words, only the quiet amusement of a man who had outlived his own legend. Later, he walked the garden path, pausing where the marigolds had grown thick, their color bright against the green. Eric joined him wordlessly, falling into step. Two old soldiers, their shadows stretching long across the lawn.
The Foundation's annual report comes out today. Your name is on the cover.
It still sounds like a stranger's name.
But it was his name, written back into the world by the stubborn faith of a brother who had never stopped looking. And as the screen darkened to a final soft black, the only sound left was the quiet laughter of two men who had at last found their way home.